Some people are just don't have the DNA for startups or entrepreneurship. I don't think a lot of founders talk enough about how hard it is to build these things. And you hear the headlines and it's all so glamorous, but it really day to day kind of isn't if you're building something of real impact. Anything we do, hopefully, you have some connection to or passion in, or we call it founder market fit for founders. I want to know when I meet a founder why the heck they think they're the right person to solve that problem in that industry. The strategic plan for your company and the vision and the mission. Do that for yourself too, and then make sure that if you're going to be a startup founder, that you merge the two together so that they actually are in the same spirit. You need ambition and you need some level of naivete or ignorance to be a great founder. But you got to also be rooted in reality, and it actually has to have a plan attached to it. So people, brand, culture, they're all kind of one and the same. Really, if you're not all rowing in the same direction, then you won't retain your customers.
So Kyle York, you're a co-founder, CEO, and managing partner at York IE, a venture capital and advisory firm that's reshaping how early stage B2B SaaS companies grow. You've led a team of over 200 professionals, advising startups on everything from product strategy to go-to-market execution. You're also known for scaling DIN from 3 million to 100 million in annual recurring revenue, ultimately landing a $600 million acquisition by Oracle. Beyond the boardroom, you're deeply involved in philanthropic efforts across New England, guiding the next generation of entrepreneurs and innovators. So let's talk a bit about building strong companies, creating generational wealth, and delivering real impact. But first, I have to ask you, growing DIN from 3 million to 100 million in ARR, what's the secret to scaling startups so well?
Well, thanks. I appreciate you guys having me. I wish there was some perfect playbook or philosophy or secret that I could give you one nugget that would answer that question. I think the reality of scaling companies is that every company is unique and different, and they play in a different market. They have a different founding team. They have different leadership. They have different competitive landscapes. They have different go-to-market strategies. They have different pricing struggles. They have different scalability and technology challenges. And I think what too often the things that get written in books or get talked about on podcasts try to give some direct linear answer. When the reality is each company is unique and each company has its own strengths and its own weaknesses. In scaling DINE or DIN, you can say it either way. DINE was short for Dynamic Network Services, so it kind of depends how you say dynamic or dynamic. But that was a specialist in internet infrastructure, and I'd love to tell you we had this clear path over the next 8 years. We want to take it to 100 million ARR. And it was really more about each year building a bottoms up financial plan and an execution plan that got to the next milestone of growth or close to it, right? And we used to have different goal setting, goal, smash, and whammo were the three different goals, and really goal was going to be quite good regardless, right? But if you could stretch and pull some different knobs and levers and take it to the next level, well, guess what? In a recurring revenue SaaS business, that means that your starting point for next year just becomes a little bit easier, right? And so all of a sudden, I can look back in hindsight and give a lot of lessons learned, but the reality was it was really a bottoms up multi-year, setting goals, being clear about the milestones, and aligning a team to go execute.
I really like what you said there, Kyle, because I always liken it to a recipe, right? Let's say you and I are both making, I'm going to be very British and say a roast dinner.
Delicious.
Exactly. Very, very bland actually, but really nice. Let's say we're both making it and you say to me, the key to a great roast dinner is extra bit of chicken salt on the potatoes, for example. And then I go and do that and I'm like, oh no, that doesn't work, because maybe I'm cooking them differently. I'm using a different oil. I'm putting it in the oven for a different length of time or with different temperature. And the change of those variables creates a different outcome, even if a proven variable is added. And I think it's the same with business. Saying that, it sounds like there was a key theme or some key principles there from what you were sharing around goal setting and around essentially the dedication to that. Could you expand a little bit more on maybe those repeatable principles, even if they play out differently?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think it's really critical that companies have we call it the messaging hierarchy, but it's really your long-term business strategy, from vision to mission to tagline to descriptors to your to your boilerplate, which is really your pitch, right? The who you are, the what you do, the how you do it, the what the value you provide is, and how to take next steps in engaging with you, all the way down into market segmentation, vertical market focus, buyer personas, ideal customer profiles. Like these things all need to kind of interconnect, right? And then as you build your business plan and align your teams, everyone needs to buy into that, from the North Star of, your vision, which really might be a mirage or a never fully attainable thing, all the way to the plan you set now. And I always think that your people are sort of like your culture, and your obviously your operational execution engine, but they also need to be bought in to your vision, which really also gets translated into your brand. So people, brand, culture, they're all kind of one and the same. And really, if you're not all rowing in the same direction and building these businesses, especially these recurring revenue subscription businesses, then you won't retain your customers. You certainly won't expand your customers. You certainly won't get referenceable customers to win the next customers. And you'll just be starting from scratch every year as you begin again, right? And I think that's what makes businesses so hard to scale. I also think it's why people love the SaaS or subscription business model so much, because your foundation setting annually that enables you to set new goals for the next year ahead. So I think it's really just around like that sort of end-to-end integrated connection people have, from like vision and strategy to like day-to-day tactics, and knowing what their role is in those milestone chasing, but also that they're actually making an impact. And what gets really, really hard for businesses, I spent 3 years after we sold Dime to Oracle in a behemoth, right? A Fortune 50 with one of the richest men in the world at the helm. And, you do the same type of thing, but then you look around and you're like, am I making any impact here? And sure, Oracle might be broadly, but are you a cog in that machine making an impact? And that's why I came back home to build York IE, a startup helping startups, because it was like, I want to be fulfilled. I want to feel rewarded. I want to know that like each call with a founder is actually helping make their dreams come true, and not feel like, I don't know if that struck or hit or was helpful.
You sold Dime for $600 million to Oracle. How did that change your life?
My parents actually just left my office. I'm based in Manchester, New Hampshire, and probably 300 yards up the street, my parents owned a small business growing up, a Main Street small business. It was a sporting goods outfitter, retailer. It's where you'd go and buy your basketball or your sneakers for sport, or uniforms or things like that. And my parents operated that business for 45 years. So I give you that foundation because one thing we lose a little bit in venture capital and fast growth tech startups is this like pragmatism, right? This like, make more money than you spend reality that Main Street small business, whether a restaurant or a retailer, needs to deal with. So I give you that context because like that's the foundation of my life. I didn't grow up with wealth. I grew up in an entrepreneurial environment where you only got out of it what you put into it. And my parents worked incredibly hard to build the foundation of my life, right? And the foundation of my business principles. So what got really interesting as I built the career in technology and in startups is one of the ways you're compensated in technology and startups is through equity. But the reality of your equity is it's really not worth anything until some sort of inevitable monetization or exit. And so along the way, sure, I started W-2 or earn a salary that was larger. Every year we had more success and I had more responsibilities as chief revenue officer. But on paper, you kind of know the company's a little bit more valuable the next day than it was the day prior, but it's very illiquid, right? You don't have that money. So for me, it was like this existential reality of my life for a very long time that like all my net worth or foundational wealth is attached to something that is amorphous, that is unreachable, that is not real, right? So the exit was wildly game changing because it turned this risk and this fear and this stress and this anxiety of will it ever happen to a really amazing financial event for myself and many others, as well as a new career platform for our company, technology, talent team, to make a broader dent on the internet landscape. So it was wildly rewarding, fulfilling, relieving. I don't think a lot of founders talk enough about how hard it is to build these things and how you hear the headlines and it's all so glamorous, but it really day to day kind of isn't if you're building something of real impact. So it was unbelievable for me. And it also enabled so much more. Just when you think of what York IE is, I was doing a lot of York IE advising and investing by my lonesome, moonlighting while I was operating, right? And it enabled me to kind of dream up a new company, kind of like a McKinsey or a Bain for startups with a venture arm. Like I'm trying to build this like really amazing resource hub and infrastructure for founders. And I wouldn't have been able to do it without the ability to take the risk and have the foundational learnings of that company and exit, but also the balance sheet to be able to take a lot of risk on.
Makes sense. And talking more about York IE and the kind of support that you offer to founders, because of course you've been through a lot of the struggles that they are going through, so you can talk to it with personal experience. What do you think are a lot of the maybe misconceptions about what founders need versus what they actually need in your experience?
Well, yeah, I mean, we've already hit on this theme a few times. One thing I couldn't stand as we scaled Dine and built a board and ended up raising outside money and brought on different advisors or consultants is so often those people hadn't ever operated in your shoes. They've been career bankers or investors. It might be quite smart, might be quite capable, but they hadn't actually been a VP of sales or a VP of engineering or a CFO before. Other times, even if they had, many times like, VCs or board folks or independent consultants, it's kind of like their retirement gig, right? So maybe it was like 2 decades ago or something, they built a company and had a massive success. But again, they're not operating in the context of 2025, right? Or like right now, I'm dealing with, interest rates. I'm dealing with the threat of tariffs, and I'm dealing with like global unrest, and I'm dealing with remote work, and I'm dealing with AI and the costs of AI and compute, and right, like these are things that are not just me as an investor and advisor, but I'm dealing with them to build York IE, my 200 plus person business, and my advisory as a service platform for startups. And I've got a team I need to have answers for, right? And I've got clients I need to have answers for. And I'm also an investor, so I can share that real-time perspective with the companies we work with. And that was one thing for me that was really important. I think it was a movie called American Pie, where one of the lead actresses used to always say, one time at band camp. I don't know if you guys recall this. She was like the redhead girl. Like I didn't want to be that guy who was like, one time at Dine in 2008 when we were at your scale of 3 million, this is what we did. Like sure, play on those experiences. Don't get me wrong, they're critical. I bring them up a lot, but I try to then also bring up like real time stuff, or hey, I was just talking to another founder 10 minutes ago and this is what they said, or you know what I'm saying? And have that like timeliness and that relevancy to right now, which is again, not dissimilar to what I was saying earlier about the context of an individual company being different. You actually have to like be relevant and connect in the real time.
That's really interesting. When I have this kind of adage that I think I thought up, there's probably something similar already out there, but that a champion is never at his or her weakest than once they've won, because now they have evidence to suggest they no longer have to innovate or change. And similarly, I think we hold on to like some of our wins in the past and just try to get a little bit more value out of them rather than having the learner's mindset in the present. And given that, how do you stay up to date with all of these frenetic changes happening?
I'm a unique, like sort of always on type of person, I operate what I call a flow-based work style. I think before we kicked off the call, I said, let's have a flowing conversation. Like that's the way I roll, right? Like I jump from one thing to the next. I just mentioned my parents were just in my office. I just had a breakfast this morning with the former governor of New Hampshire. I just went to a funeral in between, like I can sort of context switch and multitask, I think. And I think a lot of that's because I grew up in sales, managing a sales pipeline and a book of business and, knowing my quarterly goals and my annual goals and trying to hit my quotas and just being able to work across lots of different things at different stages, across different size companies, different industries, different use cases. It's really lent me nicely to what I do now, which is working with so many different companies across so many different stages of their life cycle on so many different challenges. I have an incredible executive assistant I've worked with now for nearing 15 years. Ashley Oberg, she started with me at Dine. She worked at the local farm and flower stand, in town, and I brought her in and wow, what a boost that was, because if you're going to operate in this flow and you're going to kind of be like ADD about life, then you need to have a lot of operational organization behind you. And even if you look across my leadership team, my chief investment officer, my chief marketing officer, my chief technology officer, like all the folks that I work with are all very organized. Even my wife, very organized, very attention to detail. Like it's no surprise the people I'm closest with are the compliments to me, not necessarily all pattern mapping to look exactly like me, right? So those are a couple of different things. We've also internally built a tool called Fuel. It's at fuel.york.ie, so you can check it out. But really, it's kind of an operational version of like a PitchBook or a Crunchbase. It also allows us to track, create different watch lists and track different industries, different portfolios of different VC firms. It enables me to get digests in my inbox or on my mobile device to stay on task. So if I have a call with somebody in a half hour, I can do a quick short circuit research, use a little AI integrated tools into the system and have a point of view, right? And prompt it a few times and get a better point of view. So these are the types of things that I do that have worked well for me. But again, they work well for me because I naturally can work across lots of things at once. Now, others might say, no, you don't. Yeah, some of the others might say, no, you don't. You missed this. You forgot to follow up here. No, but it seemed to work out so far in my career.
I think that's the thing in the world that we live in. Things are changing so quickly and will change ever quicker as technology builds itself, essentially. And probably being in a flow state, if we want to call it that way, is the best way to be, because if we get fixed on these things fit in these boxes, they very soon won't, right? Or we're going to have to move with it.
Well, that's kind of like sorry to interrupt, but that's kind of like the entrepreneurial DNA, I think, right? Like, I mean, because I've worked in such large organizations, I have a unique perspective of like building startups from nothing to big, but also then getting bought. And then, we were pretty senior inside Oracle. So like having that bird's eye view the other direction, like some people don't have the DNA for startups or entrepreneurship or flow state, right? Like my old boss, who's now the CEO of Docker, his name's Don Johnson. He and I used to have this whole thing where he'd say, you're multi-threaded and I'm he's like, you're multi-threaded and I'm single throughput, right? And we ended up developing this mechanism where we had big rocks and small rocks. And when I got the opportunity to have my one-on-one with him, he reported directly to Larry Ellison at Oracle and Oracle Cloud. Like we just go through, he'd be like, I can only handle one big rock today. What do you got for me? And then like sometimes at the end of the meeting, he'd be like, hit me with your top 10 small rock hit list, right? And we developed this working relationship that worked for very different DNAs and very different personalities and very different work capabilities, right? So again, I think it's about where I think you're going with the question is like, how do you sort of like augment and evolve based on the people around you, the market you're in, and all the different surroundings.
Sorry, I was just going to dig into that about the transition from startup into Oracle and that kind of flow state, things change, let's go with it, versus bigger organization that has things that are more set and they're probably less innovative. How do you keep that startup culture and work with that transition into something that's much bigger?
It's not so like black and white, right? Like meaning, sure, it might be if you sell a very small startup to an Oracle, right? But like over the life cycle of Dyn, we became a bigger company with more process, with more guidelines, with more bigger teams that required different leadership hierarchy structure, these types of things, right? So it was very like for me like evolutionary, where like you had to mature and you had to like find the balance between like scrappy startup hustle, grit and grind, and like maturity, right? Now, obviously, it's a massive slap in the face when you get wake up call when you get to an Oracle and they bring about like they have like thousands and thousands of employees that work on things that startup people would call like bureaucratic work or like back office or overhead or whatever, right? I think in a big company, it's when you want to be intrapreneurial or entrepreneurial, it's just about kind of knowing the lanes and so much you think is like telling you what to do every day. And it's more about just knowing the lanes you live in. And then you have to kind of still figure out what to do every day to add value or make an impact. And I think once I realized that, I had a great 3-year run. It's not like I took my 1 year, hold back and took a hike. I actually quite enjoyed it because, all of a sudden you're playing with like much more massive budgets and huge clients and ridiculous partnerships and fascinating potential M&As and different things that we were working on that you just wouldn't have been able to do in a startup, right? They just don't exist. I mean, I keynoted Oracle Open World London. It was 10,000 people live in the flesh in person. That was never going to happen in a startup. Like, we're doing a webinar right now, and there's 50 people showing up for it, right? So these are the types of dynamics that are just you gotta understand like what you're playing with, and kind of evolve and morph into what fits. But again, eventually for me, I talk a lot about this. Like, I realize I'm just a startup guy. Like, I'm going to go back startup, early stage. That's where I love it more, and I feel the most fulfilled, and I think I'm the most valuable. So like that's really where I recorrected to, but those are some of the learnings from it.
You talk a lot about building good companies that create generational wealth. What does it take for a company to do this?
I think first and foremost, everybody's going to have a different definition of generational wealth for them, right? Like, for some people, a couple $1 million might be generational wealth. For some people, they might say they need 10 million or 15 million or 20 million. For some people, it might be, hey, if I make 500 grand one time and I have a good career, that's generational wealth, right? And so again, like everything else, like success is relative, wealth is relative. I think like generational wealth, though, it's more about being in control of it, right? Like the venture capital playbook and the venture capital ecosystem is like, 1 of 10 startups is going to carry a fund or something, or 1 of 20 startups is going to carry a fund. And, I wanted to build a firm that helped companies with more pragmatic growth, not the kind of growth at all costs, where founders actually start to think about, how do I raise less money to reach my goals and to reach some ultimate monetization or wealth generator, right? And by doing that, you can own more of a smaller company and make the same as someone who owns less of a larger company, right?
The watermelon and grape analogy.
Yeah, exactly. The story I always give, the analogy is Aaron Levy, who's a very famous founder of Box. He founded it in his dorm room. He ended up with the exact same ish amount of equity that I ended up with at Dine, and I wasn't the founder in the dorm room, right? I joined, I was the chief revenue officer, I grew into the role, but it's because we bootstrapped so long, it didn't raise a ton of money. We ended up, now we both won. He won way more because Box is still public and killing it. But my point is, it's all kind of relative to the game you want to play. So that's really the kind of like focus I have, is more that philosophical alignment with founders on like, hey, we can create a great company. What are you playing for? What are you trying to achieve? Like, no one works or builds startup just for fun. They're trying to earn a living and earn an income, and it all ties back to money at some point. And I think establishing those goals. I have an ebook on our website called it's like how to be the CEO of your own career. And it's kind of like everything I talked about earlier on like the strategic plan for your company and the vision and the mission. Like, do that for yourself too, right? And then make sure that like if you're going to be a startup founder, that you like merge the two together so that they actually are in the same spirit. And I think so often people don't align like their personal goals and ambition and visions for where they want to be 25 years from now with like what they're building. And then that's when people get like mad. They're pissed off. They're in the situation they're in. And it's like, well, you're in the situation because you didn't like stick to your guns, right? And you didn't have a real plan.
I can see that that's such a useful thing. So many things that we do in life, we should do in business and vice versa, right? Because ultimately it's just humans doing human stuff and figuring stuff out. I'm going to change tact entirely. And I wanted to come back to, you said about your parents' company that they sold sports goods. And I think you're now also involved in sports companies. I think Torch Pro is one of them. Was that link there? Like you were into it because of how you grew up, or how did that happen?
Anything we do, hopefully you have some connection to or passion in, or, we call it founder market fit for founders. Like everyone talks about product market fit, but like, I want to know when I meet a founder, why the heck they think they're the right person to solve that problem in that industry. And hopefully it's because they have a perspective or they have experience in that industry. And that could go all the way back to your youth and your family and your upbringing, to the jobs you had, the roles you had, the companies you invested in. So there's definitely, I'm always trying to search for some of that connection, right? So Torch Pro ended up merging with a firm called Shift Group that helps, it's a platform for HR teams and companies to, it's a marketplace, former athletes and military personnel, so high performance people who retire who don't know what to do with their careers get trained in sales, and companies use this because they want competitive people to come in. And so that's an athletic tie-in, right? We have another one called Distinct, which is a SaaS platform for live sporting events to collect first-party fan data at live events for brands, right? Really, really interesting. They just did a huge Super Bowl partnership with Verizon, and so I always try to I think it's not always that what we invest in or what we support as a client is a passion, but I always try to find my hooks in it, right, or my connection to it, and where I can. Obviously, I want to work more on the things that I enjoy. And I remember when we launched this firm, my brother Travis once said to me, like, it's really fun to watch you in your most authentic self. And he was kind of crapping on me. It was like a backhanded compliment. Like my three companies prior, my two startups. One was a vertical software business for education software. It sold prep schools, private schools, boarding schools, K to 12. I love that company. It's a great company. I learned a lot. I started as an intern. I moved to California with them. I learned an unbelievable amount with them. Did I really care that much about prep schools? I went to public school. I wasn't like some education guy, right? But I loved a lot about the business, and I found my hooks in that work. Then I went to a domain name system company, Dyn. We specialize in internet infrastructure. Am I some tech nerd who's like obsessed with internet routing and the BGP and the DNS and internet protocols? No, but I love the clients we worked with. I love the team we built. I love the impact we made in the global internet. Same with Oracle, right? So you have to shift your brain to be like, well, what is my relevancy here? How do I personally connect to this vision and this mission? And how do I wake up every day and do this job, regardless of what you're paid, right? I think at the end of the day, you really got to find that passion, that connection. And so we launched York IE. It was like, I'm going to build the one thing that I wish I had when I was scaling my company. And the one thing I see as a void for all these other companies that I angel invest in or advise in or sit on boards for. And if I can create that infrastructure for the startup ecosystem that de-risks and becomes an insurance policy for anybody who has a stake in these companies, then I will feel fulfilled in the end. And I think I'm trying to build it big because I want to impact as many startups as possible. And I think we have the opportunity to. So yeah, I think a lot of it does tie back to that. I'm also the middle son of 5 boys. I grew up in sales. I played college football. I have the competitive DNA too, right? Yeah, my mom, who I know, and she's, by the way, she's like 5 feet tall. Like she's in charge, right? So
you've done an impressive amount of philanthropy through the York Family Foundation. Why is giving back important to you?
Yeah, it's the same sort of thing, right? Like when I grew up in a small business that did youth sports equipment and uniforms, like there was so much that my dad did, especially where no one knew he was doing it, whether it was giving a kid a free glove or giving discount to the local Pop Warner football team, or he was always doing stuff, and you kind of just watch it as a youngster, right? There was this thing called product research that was what you'd write on the paper receipts whenever you were just giving something away, or it was product research, right? And I guess back then every manufacturer enabled a certain amount of product research for any retailer that was selling their stuff. So you just learn, like, that was kind of ingrained in me, in my family, since we were very young. And then as we built Dyn's actually in my hometown. I'm in Manchester, New Hampshire, and we grew fast, right? We grew to 500 employees. Like we were proof you could build a tech company and career from anywhere. We're not in Silicon Valley. We're only 45 minutes from Boston, so we're not on the moon here. But it was definitely a different thing. And that company, we had to really define where we were going to be charitable or philanthropic. And I think as we did that, we realized, like, the company needs to have clear definition, but you as an individual should also have clear definition of where you're going to be charitable. And I'm not saying don't give $50, $100 on GoFundMe's and support things like that. Don't get me wrong. But where you do philanthropy, which tends to be multi-year pledges and bigger dollar amounts, you should really have a vision, a mission, a thesis, a philosophy, an execution plan. It should be long-term. It shouldn't be reactionary. It should have lanes, right? So Katie and I, my wife, we decided that we wanted our kids to grow up with the same sort of community mindfulness that we did. And we focus the Family Foundation on kids and next generation, and trying to make opportunities more available to others. And that's sort of the key theme of the family foundation. So like Boston Children's Hospital, the Boys and Girls Clubs, the Special Olympics, like those types of things are the areas that we focus, where the company focuses on entrepreneurship and STEM and technology and different, organizations like that support what we do from a corporate perspective. And so it's really trying to, like, again, define it like everything else I've said. So then it enables you to go hard at everything and know that you're, not spraying and praying or peanut buttering or not being consistent with what you do.
It comes back to what you were saying about within businesses. If you're going to be in, let's say, sports and athleticism, great, there's a passion there. But then you might be in something to do with telecoms, and you go, okay, where's the passion here? Where am I? You use the phrase which was ultimately feeling fulfilled. And I think that's a kind of theme here with philanthropic work, with what you do in your life, with what you do in business. Ultimately, where can you get that fulfillment and identify what that is early doors, define it, and allow that to be your guide as you make decisions, I guess.
Well, and it's what you're playing for, right? I think a lot of times, like the interview question, it's like always so cheesy and common, is like, where do you want to be in 5 years, whatever. It's like, I kind of like to be like, what's your long-term vision for yourself at the end of your career? Like what's going to make you ultimately satisfied and fulfilled with your life, right? And that's not just because again, we work to support our lives, right? Like let's not forget what we all play for, whatever goals or dreams or aspirations you have, right? So I like to ask that and then like help people like work back to today to actually have a plan to do it. And again, that's how I try to think about everything. It's like, to most people that in my friends, kids I grew up with, college friends, they think I'm like all over the map, but I'm like really, really clear about, I have York IE, that's tech, investing, entrepreneurship. I have the York Family Foundation, it's philanthropy. And I have York Real Estate, which is like local real estate and real estate investing. And that's just to diversify out of tech, because I'm so heavily weighted in tech. It's like not rocket science. And then I make sure in those lanes I have definition that of the things I'm interested in that make me fulfilled, that help me achieve my vision for myself, which is really just freedom and independence to do what I want, right? It's not that crazy, right? And then make as big of an impact as possible, because you've got one life and you've got one opportunity, and you gotta. Am I quoting Eminem by accident? But you wanna make it happen. So it's about having the framework, and I don't want to like get carried away here. This isn't some like family business plan. This isn't some Jerry Maguire mission statement or anything. Like, this is just more like, you could whiteboard this in a minute. You can have a conversation with your significant other and talk about what you guys want, like, and achieve, right? Like, and that's more of what I mean. It's not as rigid as a company operating plan and financial model and P&L and cash flow statement. Let's not get crazy, but I do think you should have it in other facets of your life and for your greater life.
You're known for your go-to-market expertise. What is a secret or overlooked go-to-market tactic that startups can use that they're missing out on?
Well, I'm a massive brand guy. I think so many people who think of like the fact that I grew up in sales, and even think about the fact that I'm in SaaS, would think it's all like so aggressively metrics driven, and so like put $1 in, get $1 out based. I believe in like playing the long game, the brand development, community development, ecosystem partnerships. How do you get like one to many exposure? I mean, even doing these podcasts, like every year I go on a podcast tour. I try to meet great people like you who have great podcasts with different and unique audiences, from different backgrounds. I'm learning stuff from the questions you're asking, from your perspectives. And, we try to promote that to the world, just like you're going to promote it to the world. But it's all for the end game of more startups, more partners, more people seeing us, and getting engaged in that way, right? So I am a firm believer in that, and not all companies are, right? They kind of, you see so many startups, for example, who are stealth for 2 years, and it's like, get your voice out to the world. It doesn't mean you have the perfect product yet, but I'm a firm believer in it. May seem silly, like the growth hack of brand cultivation, but I think you need to work just as hard and hustle just as much at evangelizing your story, training your team to do the same. And that's the best hack I can tell you from a go-to-market perspective.
It's interesting from like a chess kind of analogy where people go stealth, and I'm assuming probably because they believe that a first mover advantage will be significant enough that they shouldn't really signal what they're doing. But then, as we've probably discovered in other elements of our business and lives, it's surprising how many blind spots you have. And sometimes by just being transparent, you actually get more ideas than you're giving away. And so there's this kind of sliders that you're working, and sometimes people will benefit from an initial thrust in a new market advantage, and other times they'll just signal to a larger player, oh, actually, we could just pivot this and go like either acquire them or outcompete them. So it's really interesting to see the different tactics or strategies play out.
Yeah, I think for me, it's fine if it's stealth, if it's like a deep IP, deep tech, like something like wildly innovated or requiring of patents, or, you know, like where its defensibility and its moat is truly the IP and the technology. If not, get your damn brand out there, right? Like it really makes no sense to me, right? And we call this the market in approach to company building, right? Like so often startups, and this has been a nuance of York IE and a learning, like so often when we launched the firm, my whole career was being the go-to-market business counterpart of technical founders, right? As an operator. That's what I did all the way from Whipple Hill, my first company, to Dine to Oracle. That's what I did. If I look at my boss or my peers, they were deeply engineering, deeply technical, most likely introverted, different type of personality, right? And expertise. Well, that's what we launched a firm on. There's a lot of engineers out there who start companies and have no clue how to do go-to-market or how to do capital strategy or how to build a financial plan or, how to be more thoughtful about the other parts of the business that we think are critical, especially in recurring revenue subscription software businesses. What's also happened, though, is, I don't talk about this as much as I should, but we realized right away that actually a lot of people from industries who are business people or go-to-market people have ideas in technology and software, and especially with AI, that they believe that some technology could, automate an industry or a workflow or bring it more efficiency to a different sector. And they're building new companies, but they actually have no idea how to build a product or what it takes or how to resource engineering or how to scale infrastructure, or, where to begin. And so much of our business and the biggest service we offer is an R&D, full stack R&D service to help you build your application and scale your technology teams, right? Like that's a huge part about what we do now. And when I founded the firm in late 2019 into COVID into 2020, it was the other way around, right? And so now we've found this balance where it's like, come to us for helping scale your technology company. That might mean finance and capital and accounting and legal. That might mean marketing and RevOps and website and digital. That might mean mobile app development or UI UX or DevOps. And we need to build a platform that enables that support for startups everywhere.
Along that same line, if you put your investor hat on, what are some of the red flags that you see, let's say in a pitch, where 3 slides in, you're like, no. What are those things that stand out to you?
You need ambition, and you need some level of like naivete or ignorance to be a great founder, right? Because it's kind of like so much of it's kind of impractical, right? I'm going to go come up with an idea. I'm going to go raise money. I'm going to build this company from nothing, and it's going to become the next thing, right? But you got to also be like rooted in reality, and it actually has to have a plan attached to it. So, when we're evaluating companies, obviously we're so early, so it really does come down to that like founder and team and the founder market fit, and like, do we believe that they're the right people to execute? But we look like anyone would at the market opportunity, at the competitive landscape, at the technology and architecture and IP and product roadmap, the go-to-market proof, the strategy and the proof points and the customers. We look at the financials, but we're a pre-seed seed investor. So we're investing in companies of hundreds of thousands to very low millions of ARR. And, you're going to have some signaling and some trend lines and some proof points and some referenceability, and you're going to be able to back channel the different folks in industry to understand. But at the end of the day, you're making a bet on people. But I think the biggest red flag for me is when it's just like their plan is so mismatched from reality of what's possible. I mean, remember one company my team brought to me, I was like, guys, their financial plan would be the fastest growing SaaS company in history. And they're raising $2.5 million. That company raised $250 million in its life, right? So it's just that balance of like, yeah, have a bravado and vision and dream for what you can do, but also have it rooted in an actual plan that we all believe in, right? And so that's a huge, huge thing for me. And then obviously having the capital strategy that fits that plan, right? Because so often it's like, we want to raise 10 million on a $100 million valuation. I'll be like, you have 500K of ARR. Like, why do you think you deserve a valuation of 50X right now, right? And so it's those are the things that are just, I think it's people get starry-eyed. They read the headlines on TechCrunch and Business Insider. All the vanity metrics get celebrated. All the outliers are who get celebrated. And it's like, hey, play for like everybody else who's successful in building a tech company, and you'll do just fine. And oh, by the way, we're not against, like, if you become a breakout star and outliers emerge in our portfolio of investments, wonderful, right? But you don't need to play for binary outcome or Hail Mary passes, right? So that's I think it's finding that balance with founders.
What's your favorite aspect of being an investor?
It's working with the entrepreneurs we try to play like a more like independent role than a straight VC, meaning like, boards have founders on the board and they typically have VCs on the board. And even when we're in the VC seat, we try to play like what I would call like the independent board member role. So it's sort of the helping the companies scale, but also keeping all these parties who have different economic incentives and different timelines and different viewpoints all aligned, right? And we do end up being that fulcrum a lot between parties. And I think maybe that's just natural because we're looking at so many companies and we have the advisory business and the investments business, and we sort of have a different lens on the market landscapes than maybe a straight VC would, because of the advisory team and infrastructure and company we're building. But that for me is the best part. I just got off with a founder on my way back to the office for this call, and he's evaluating fundraising, and we're talking to the potential net new investors. We're talking to the existing board and investors. We're trying to see, does this all make sense? Can we? It's like how the sausage gets made. Like, how does it all come together? And he it's funny. This founder keeps like, he really is delineating between playbooks of like tier one venture capital, win at all costs, go for it, more pragmatic approach. And then there's kind of everything in between, right? And it's like, hey, it doesn't need to be one or the other, but we need to make sure we pick the right partner who believes in playing the right plays at the right times based on your unique opportunity.
So again, we've talked about this before, that all the different variables that are coming up. B2B SaaS in particular, I mean, SaaS technology in particular, changing quickly. What trends or shakeups do you see coming over the next, let's say, 3 to 5 years?
First of all, when I think of SaaS, I think of two things. I think of the business model of like just subscription, predictable, revenue, like consistent KPIs, like looking at the same things from growth rates to gross margins to gross retention to net retention, right? Like there's certain metrics that like a healthy business has to show that it's like good and scalable and sustaining, right? And so I think of SaaS as like the business model. And you can, by the way, tell right away when you, back to the evaluating founders, when you review like financials or a capital strategy or financial model, you can tell right away if they know SaaS, the business model, or not. Okay. So secondarily, you have SaaS as a deployment model. So, really think of it like an in the cloud service that is multi-tenant, that you can access over the World Wide Web, through a browser or on your phone, right? Like those are the two kind of variables when I think of SaaS, right? I think what gets overly like broadly spoken about is just like the SaaS landscape, right? Because it's like there are so many different layers of subscription business model, from infrastructure and cybersecurity and developer tools, all the way to data platforms, up to horizontal software, vertical software, and everything in between. And so clearly the easy answer would be to tell you AI at all layers of the stack. But I actually think what you're seeing up stack, so more in the app layer, is actually software being developed for industries. And I talked about this a little bit earlier with the vertical software, like for industries that don't even have good software or workflows yet. Like they're not looking for like AI automation efficiency. Like actually, the manufacturing shop floor owner is not looking for hardcore AI and language learning models, right? They're looking for like, can you give me better analytics off my machines, right? And so I think what we're seeing a lot of, and where we're investing heavily, is in vertical software. And vertical software is really just like workflow, automation, efficiency. And there might be flavors of AI, but not every company is like a .ai in that landscape, if that makes sense. So that's a hot one for us. I also think as the world gets more chaotic and crazy, I go back to my sort of infrastructure cyber roots, right? Like it is the wild, wild west out there. Like like actually I saw X, we're recording today, but yesterday X, I was trying to follow with the National Football League free agency started here in America, but X was down all day because they were being cyber attacked. And Elon Musk went on an interview last night and said some of the IPs were originating from the Ukraine region, right? So this was something that at Dyn, my old company, we ran what we called an internet intelligence team, and we could see this global map of the internet and see all this. And I was kind of missing not being at Dyn. Also, X was a huge client of ours. But so I was kind of like flashing back to like, wow, like the global internet landscape. And like, we just like, we go on the internet and we expect that, Riverside.fm is going to work well today. And, that we're going to be able to, you guys are going to go on York IE's website before this call and get a quick read on me and check out my LinkedIn and all that. And we just expect it to work no different than we do electricity and plumbing and all that. So I think this is like still a common thing, and it's only going to get worse as more and more industries move to the cloud and move to SaaS. And I just think there needs to be way, way more. And even security, like we have a company called Cranium. It's cybersecurity on your AI, right? Because it's like, who's making sure the AI is doing what it said it was going to do, and it's coming from where it said it was going to come. And so I think there's just a whole market that's going to emerge there as well, where those companies who've been doing it a long time are going to come to the forefront.
Do you think we'll ever reach the point where it does, basically it's as secure as our faucet? Like you can trust that there'll always be water when you need it? Or do you think it's always going to be just, chaos where sometimes you have access to things? Most of the time you have access, but sometimes you won't.
Chaos forever. Because we're never going to allow like some giant monopoly to own the ISP in your home all the way to the physical data center where technology resides, right? It's a system from the very beginning that's based on trust, and it's based on many different players playing at different parts of the journey of serving internet content and internet access, all the way to the types of internet access you're getting. So, I think it can continually get better. I think we can continue to have more visibility into challenges. We can troubleshoot faster. I was shocked it took X so long yesterday. But you remember on Twitter, when Twitter came out, they had the fail whale. So the fail whale was a thing where if Twitter went down, it actually, what they would do is they used our technology at our DNS level to traffic managers. If Twitter was going down, they would fail it over immediately using monitoring and DNS routing to a page that was a whale that was basically Twitter's down, but we'll be right back. And it was just a whale on a page, right? And that was 2008, 2009, right? And then when they come back online, they'd redirect the traffic back to twitter.com, right? And, here we are, 2025, and Twitter's down for a day during NFL free agency and political unrest around the world. And, and it's just a really interesting dynamic. So I don't think it can go away. I think it can get better. But the reality is there's more people on the planet, more internet users everywhere. There's going to be breaks in the system that happen. We used to see things like, we're going to start seeing it with Starlink, but it was like undersea cables getting clipped by shipping containers. And it's like, why is the internet down in the UK right now? And it's like, well, it's down in the UK because they have literally a ship hit a sea. Well, guess what's going to happen with Starlink? A meteor is going to hit a satellite, right? Like it's just going to shift and change, but it's an ever evolving thing.
Well, as well as human intervention, right? So it's kind of like the criminals always being ahead of the police kind of thing. We're all catching up with each other. There's always going to be someone that can do something that then somebody has to innovate a way out of that, and so on.
It's progress. Yeah, it's totally. And I mean, I think like, it's so funny because like so oftentimes the things that do break the internet are the kid in the parent's basement or the ship hitting something on purpose or not on purpose, right? Like, so like we used to look at the internet routes and tell you something was down or up or slow or fast, right? But then we would have to do like forensics to try to figure out why. And if you go look up Dyn and the history of Dyn, I was in everything from the Wall Street Journal to on CNN, so many different times, like talking about why. But it was always like kind of like a journalist would do investigative reporting, because it was never like, you never really knew, right? And sometimes you'd find out, sure, it was a nation state and bad actors, or it was a kid in their parents' basement, or it was an accident. Remember, there was one great story of like I think the country of Georgia. Some woman was like farming in her garden, and like was like thought she was taking out a root, and she took out a cable that took down the country's internet. Like stuff like that. And it's like, and she was not on. It was not malicious or ill-willed or ill-intended. It was like an older woman growing vegetables. So I think I don't think people realize, like, at the end of the day, this cloud, this SaaS model, everything we're talking about gets back to the physical at some point. And we never really think about this. AI is actually starting to talk about this a little bit with these massive data centers for compute and networking. And, it's a wild reality that I always love to remind people about. I didn't know we were going to go here on this podcast, by the way, but I love talking about it. It's actually like a little bit of dormant expertise, because it's not like we only focus on cyber and internet infrastructure or cloud computing like we did at Oracle and Dime, but there's a lot there to talk about.
Well, maybe we need to do a part 2. It was a pleasure, Kyle. Thanks for coming on and sharing a bit of your wisdom, and what you're doing is really exciting. Is there anything else that you want to say before we close out, or point people to where they can follow you?
Yeah, sure. Well, I appreciate you both having me. I love these conversations, as you can tell. So I really appreciate it. And you can find me on social at KYork20. 20 is my old sports number. Back to the sports discussions we were having. But we're just at York Growth across all social channels too. And york.ie is our website. But we'd love to talk to any founder who's looking for support.